William Meagher Tweed, widely known as Boss Tweed, was an American politician most notable for being the boss of Tammany Hall, the Democratic Party political machine that played a major role in the politics of the 19th century New York City and state. Tweed was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1852 and the New York County Board of Supervisors in 1858, the year he became the head of the Tammany Hall political machine. He was also elected to the New York State Senate in 1867, but Tweed's greatest influence came from being an appointed member of a number of boards and commissions, his control over political patronage in New York City through Tammany, and his ability to ensure the loyalty of all voters through jobs he could create and dispense on city-related projects. The Panic of 1873 was a financial crisis which triggered a severe international economic depression in both Europe and the United States that lasted until 1879, and even longer in some countries. The depression was known as the Great Depression until the 1930s, but is now sometimes known as the Long Depression. The panic was caused by the fall in demand for silver internationally, which followed Germany's decision to abandon the silver standard in the wake of the Franco-Prussian War. The Great Betrayal refers to a purported informal, unwritten deal that settled the intensely disputed 1876 U.S. presidential election and ended Reconstruction in the South. Through the compromise, Republican Rutherford B. Hayes was awarded the White House over Democrat Samuel J. Tilden on the understanding that Hayes would remove the federal troops whose support was essential for the survival of Republican state governments in South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. The National Labor Union, NLU, was the first national labor federation in the United States. Founded in 1866 and dissolved in 1873, it paved the way for other organizations such as the Knights of Labor and the AFL, American Federation of Labor. It was led by William H. Sylvis. The National Labor Union followed the unsuccessful efforts of labor activists to form a national coalition of local trade unions. The National Labor Union sought instead to bring together all of the national labor organizations in existence, as well as the 8-hour leagues, established to press for the 8-hour day, to create a national federation that could press for labor reforms and help found national unions in these areas where none existed. The new organization favored arbitration over strikes and called for the creation of a national labor party as an alternative to the two existing parties. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 is a United States federal law that was designed to regulate the railroad industry, particularly its monopolistic practices. The act required the railroad rates be reasonable and just, but did not empower the government to fix specific rates. It also required that railroads publicize shipping rates and prohibited short-haul, long-haul fare discrimination, a form of price discrimination against smaller markets, particularly farmers. The Act created a federal regulatory system, the Interstate Commerce Commission, ICC, which it charged with monitoring railroads to ensure that they complied with the new regulations. The Sherman Antitrust Act is a landmark federal statute on competition law passed by Congress in 1890. It prohibits certain business activities that reduce competition in the marketplace and requires the United States federal government to investigate and pursue trust companies and organizations suspected of being in violation. It was the first federal statute to limit cartels and monopolies, and today still forms the basis for most antitrust litigation by the United States federal government. The American Red Cross, ARC, also known as the American National Red Cross, is a humanitarian organization that provides emergency assistance, disaster relief, and education inside the United States. It is the designated U.S. affiliate of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. The Library of Congress is the research library of the United States Congress, de facto National Library of the United States of America, and the oldest federal cultural institution in the United States. Located in 4 buildings in Washington, D.C., as well as the Packard campus in Culpeper, Virginia, is the largest library in the world by shelf space and number of books. The head of the library is the Librarian of Congress, currently James H. Billington. The Pikes Peak Gold Rush, later known as the Colorado Gold Rush, was the boom in gold prospecting and mining in Pikes Peak country of western Kansas Territory and southwest Nebraska Territory of the United States that began in July 1858, and lasted until roughly the creation of the Colorado Territory on February 28, 1861. An estimated 100,000 gold seekers took part in one of the greatest gold rushes in North American history. The participants in the gold rush were known as 59ers after 1859, the peak year of the rush, and often used the motto, Pikes Peak or Bust. The Homestead Act were several United States federal laws that gave an applicant ownership of land, typically called a homestead, at little or no cost. In the United States, this originally consisted of grants totaling 160 acres, 65 hectares, or one-fourth of a section, of unappropriated federal land within the boundaries of the public land states. In extension of the homestead principle in law, the United States Homestead Acts were initially proposed as an expression of the free soil policy of Northerners who wanted individual farmers to own and operate their own farms, as opposed to Southern slave owners who could use groups of slaves to economic advantage. The Gold Standard Act of the United States was passed in 1900, approved on March 14th, and established gold as the only standard for redeeming paper money. Stopping bimetallism, which had allowed silver in exchange for gold, it was signed by President William McKinley. The Teller Amendment was an amendment to a joint resolution of the United States Congress enacted on April 20th, 1898, in reply to President William McKinley's war message. It placed a condition on the United States military in Cuba. According to clause, the U.S. could not annex Cuba, but only leave control of the island to its people. The Panama Canal is a 48-mile, 77.1 kilometer ship canal in Panama that connects the Atlantic Ocean via the Caribbean Sea to the Pacific Ocean. The canal cuts across the Isthmus of Panama and is a key conduit for international maritime trade. There are locks at each end to lift ships up to Gontum Lake, which was used to reduce the amount of work required for sea level connection. The current locks are 110 feet wide. A third wider lane of locks is being built. The Root-Takehara Agreement was an agreement between the United States and the Empire of Japan negotiated between the United States Secretary of State Elihu Root and Japanese Ambassador to the United States Takehara Kagoru. Signed on the 30th of November 1908, the agreement consisted of an official recognition of the territory status quo as of November 1908, affirmation of the independence and territory integrity of China, i.e. the open door policy as proposed by John Hay, maintenance of free trade and equal commercial opportunities, Japanese commercial opportunities, Japanese recognition of the American annexation of the Kingdom of Hawaii and the Philippines, and American recognition of Japan's position in northeast China. Implicit in the agreement was American acknowledgement of Japan's right to annex Korea and dominance over southern Manchuria, and Japanese acquiescence to limitations on Japanese immigration to California. The Hepburn Act is a 1906 United States federal law that gave the Interstate Commerce Commission the power to set maximum railroad rates and extend its jurisdiction. This led to the discontinuation of free passes to loyal shippers. In addition, the ICC could view the railroad's financial records, a task simplified by standardized bookkeeping systems. For any railroad that resisted, the ICC's conditions would remain in effect until the outcome of resolution said otherwise. By the Hepburn Act, the ICC's authority was extended to cover bridges, terminals, ferries, railroad sleeping cars, express companies, and oil pipelines. The Aldrich-Vreeland Act was passed in response to the Panic of 1907 and established the National Monetary Commission, which recommended the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. On May 27, 1908, the bill passed the House on a mostly party-line vote of 166 to 140, with 13 Republicans voting against it and no Democrats voting for it. On May 30th, it passed in the Senate with 43 Republicans in favor and 5 Republicans joining 17 Democrats opposed. President Roosevelt signed the bill that same night. The 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution established direct election of the United States Senators by popular vote. The amendment supersedes Article 1 and 3, Clauses 1 and 2 of the Constitution, under which senators were elected by state legislators. It also alters the procedure for filling vacancies in the Senate, allowing for state legislators to permit their governors to make temporary appointments until a special election can be held. Under the original provisions of the Constitution, senators were elected by state legislators. This was intended to ensure that the federal government contained representatives of the states, also to provide a body not dependent on popular support that could afford to take a more detached view of issues coming before Congress. However, over time, various perceived issues with these provisions, such as the risk of corruption and the potential for electoral deadlocks or lack of representation should a seat become vacant, led to a campaign for reform.